Hello everyone, today I wanted to return to the subject of schizoid personality disorder, or simply a personality type, as could be considered by some people. I think there is much more to say than I've said in the previous videos. It's a very peculiar state of mind, or a way of life. And I know that many people who subscribe to this channel would be quite interested in exploring this personality type more in depth, if you will. So, in this video, I wanted to talk more about the boundaries or the defense mechanisms which occur in the schizoid mind. We know that schizoid personality is primarily created by the schism that separates different parts of the personality, and especially the personality itself and the rest of the world. In other words, the authentic self, the true self, becomes to some extent separated from the conscious awareness, from the conscious personality, but some link is still maintained to it, and most of the defenses oscillate around maintaining this connection with the authentic self, which, and this connection is actually quite fragile. That's what causes this various schizoid behaviors, which by some people could be considered as quite unhealthy, such as social isolation, avoidance of certain challenges because of other people, or because of the possibility of meeting other people, avoidance of feelings, and so on and forth. So I wanted to go briefly through these defenses, hopefully giving you some understanding of these different dynamics that happen on this more or less conscious and also probably unconscious levels. Now, the first thing we know is that the primary dynamic of the psyche, of the schizoid psyche, is that of the dissociation, so that different components of personality become dissociated or split from each other. So, for example, that's why someone with schizoid personality might struggle with knowing how they feel or what they feel. They might struggle with expressing their emotions because they don't have that much experience with this self-expression, because of years of hiding their true self, hiding their true emotions and feelings. So these different emotional components might get dissociated from the conscious self, and because of this, the usual schizoid behaviors might happen. Now, because of this dissociation, there might also be an experience of feeling as if you are not inside your body. You might, on the other hand, you might be very aware of your surroundings, very aware of what's going on around you. But on the other hand, you might feel like you're not really inside your body. You might feel, this disconnection from the present moment. You might feel as if your awareness or your consciousness is, floating just outside your body. Now, there are many different types of dissociation. For example, people with other personality disorders might have completely different experiences of dissociation. For example, someone with borderline personality disorder, they might completely dissociate from the whole experience of the present moment. They might not understand what's going on with them. Now, this is it's severe dissociation, but it's quite different to what's going on with the schizoid personality. Obviously, the defense mechanisms are about defending something, right? So I think it's very important to understand what is it that we are trying to defend. There are different theories, but in a general sense, the core element of the psychic life that needs to be defended is this authentic self. So the next thing to understand is what could be threatening to this authentic self, what could be threatening to this true self. Now, we know that not all people are very empathic, not all people are very nice, not all of our experiences with other people could be considered as being pleasant, sometimes even far from it. So we know that as someone with schizoid personality disorder, such individual probably went through such experiences with other people at some point in their life that they might develop probably like an unconscious list of potential threats that might come from other people. These threats might include conflict. It might include various behaviors that invalidate you or make you feel misunderstood. Various behaviors that make you feel perhaps abandoned or simply rejected. So again, these defense mechanisms will revolve around avoiding these threats from the outside world. So perhaps you might project an image or a persona of someone who isn't very vulnerable, someone who is, self-sufficient, independent, someone who, has their shit together and doesn't really need other people in order to help them out or anything like that. So this leads us to the next defense mechanism, which is this mechanism of presenting yourself in a specific manner towards the world, towards other people, so that other people will not really find out a lot about your authentic self. They will not know how you feel, how you experience life, because you will only give them what you are comfortable with, which is that I'd like to call it a self-sufficient or independent self. Now, obviously, this barrier is, very protective. It's an excellent mechanism if you want to avoid being hurt by other people, because obviously nobody will ever know you, right? They will only see this mask, if you like. So these are most common defense mechanisms used by someone with schizoid personality. Now, I want to make something clear. I would imagine that schizoid personality occurs on the spectrum, right? So the best I can do is to just simply generalize the whole experience. I can't really say that each individual will have precisely the same experience, right? I can't really provide you like perfect formula for each individual, because we are all different. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different skills, different understandings, and different knowledge about the world and ourselves, and so on and forth. So again, the best I can give you is this generalization. And, so you might relate to one thing, but then you might not really resonate with the other thing. So that's something to keep in mind. So the very presence of these defense mechanisms is not all that is going on, really, because we might go through different experiences which actually trigger or pose a threat, these defense mechanisms. And that's where things get interesting, because that's where we can get entangled into these different behaviors that, might be seen as unusual or difficult to understand for some people, even to ourselves. But basically the way we deal with these threats to this defense mechanism, which I'm going to describe in a minute, basically this ways that we deal with these threats will reinforce these defense mechanisms so that they might become even stronger as we progress with life. So that's like a vicious circle, because first we have negative experiences. So then we develop these defense mechanisms, and then we might experience threats or triggers to these defense mechanisms, which is again a negative experience for us. So then we're going to reinforce the defense mechanisms over and over again. And obviously that's how we lock ourselves into this mental prison where we feel isolated. We feel like we are not doing enough with our lives, that perhaps there's much more to life than what we are doing now. Perhaps we might feel as we underachieve in many areas. Perhaps we might want to have more intimate relationships, but this defense mechanism will obviously prevent us from having them. So that's something to think about as I'm going through these triggers. Now again, you might feel as if you relate to some of these triggers, but perhaps you're not really resonating with the rest of them. It really depends on the person. So again, it is all just a generalization based on my own experience and working with my clients and the research. So most of these triggers are, not surprisingly, related to relationships with other people. The first trigger on my list is, there are a few actually, just occurring in a cluster if you like. There might be a possibility of conflict, disapproval, abandonment, rejection, or simply being misunderstood. Now, all these possibilities are like a direct push on your defense mechanisms, because you then might conclude that, perhaps your authentic self is coming out. Perhaps you are being seen. Perhaps, other people are not very accepting of you. Perhaps other people, they want to attack you. They want to destroy your authentic self. There are all sorts of interpretations that we might go through in such situations. So this sort of situations might give rise to distressing emotions such as anxiety or shame, because we then feel like we are not defending ourselves enough, that perhaps we are not as invulnerable as we thought we are. Perhaps there is a threat that is stronger than our defense mechanism. So as a coping strategy for this sort of behaviors or situations that we meet in the real life, we might engage simply in the avoidance of the threat. We might isolate ourselves further. We might, simply avoid people, avoid certain situations. We might also engage in people pleasing. So we might try to just simply forget about our own needs and desires and try to do the best that we think would be for the other person. So, we might in a way sacrifice ourselves in order to avoid the conflict and avoid this further abandonment or rejection or simply being misunderstood. Obviously, these behaviors, this coping strategies will reinforce our behaviors because, for example, if you sacrifice yourself or if you're constantly trying to please other people, regardless whether it's good for you and whether it's good for them in the first place, you will come to understanding that, hey, I'm not doing enough for myself. I'm suffering here, right? So because of this realization, which usually comes after the fact, you're going to reinforce the defense mechanisms and you're going to place a further and more stronger barrier between yourself and other people. And obviously that's how the cycle repeats itself, because eventually you are bound to be in a situation of conflict. You are bound to be misunderstood. There are all sorts of people. You're going to meet all sorts of people. And it doesn't mean that every single person will understand you perfectly. So that's how we get ourselves into this never-ending cycle of coping strategies and various defense mechanisms. Now, the next trigger on my list is simply intimacy. So, intimate relationships, friendships, family relationships, or even forming new friendships and so on and forth. So it's very common for people with schizoid personality to see relationships, any sort of relationships, as, intrusive, invasive, or very demanding, because we feel like we don't get enough space, we are being misunderstood, other people demand too much of us, and so on and forth. And of course, that might be actually true in some cases. We might not be suitable to be in a relationship with everyone that we meet. There are cases of the so-called toxic relationships where, both people involved actually suffer because simply they're not a good match. So that's something to consider as well. But in other cases, relationships in general sense for someone with schizoid personality are simply seen like a threat to our identity, a threat to our defense mechanism probably, because we are expected to be intimate with someone and expose our authentic self. So doing so will, most likely produce some anxiety as well, because we are then placed in a situation where we need to drop our defense mechanisms in order to expose our real self, in order to express our authentic emotions. I mean, that's what most people expect from others in relationships. Otherwise, there is no real connection. Additionally, there is again a problem of our habits of self-sacrifice and pleasing other people and placing other people above ourselves in order to, avoid conflicts, avoid misunderstandings, avoid, gaining a lot of attention from other people. So again, relationships for someone with schizoid personality might be seen as not being very healthy for them, not being very good for them. But on the other hand, you might as well feel like, you want to connect with other people. Because, we all are social beings. We want to connect with people. We want to form these different relationships and so on and forth. Now, the last trigger I wanted to talk about, but I realize it can be actually quite subjective, and I'm not sure if there is a lot of scientific literature that talks about it, but I would imagine that there might be a problem with situations where you become something like a center of attention. So that will include public speaking, leadership, introducing yourself to other people, taking charge, and so on and forth. So any sort of role where you simply become the center of attention. Now, these sort of roles that I've described demand a lot of confidence, authenticity, spontaneity, and probably lots of emotional intelligence in order to understand what you feel, how you feel, and how other people around you feel in order to, for example, lead a group properly or develop a perfect speech. Now, I put it on the list because this sort of roles demand of you expressing your authentic self. And we know that there is a problem with the self-expression and schizoid personality. Now, I would imagine it's not the case with everyone because perhaps you are so developed that, the whole act of being in the center of attention could become like a performance for you. So you don't really have to expose this authentic self. So I would imagine that's a possibility as well. But in a general sense, because of this composition and complexity of the different defense mechanisms and triggers and coping mechanisms and so on and forth, someone with schizoid might struggle with, confidence, self-esteem, and being able to, express your opinions, express your feelings and your thoughts in various situations. So because of all these possibilities, being placed in a spotlight might be another trigger for these defense mechanisms to occur or to arise, because these situations might be anxiety provoking. They might make you to realize that you are, vulnerable inside, that you might receive criticism, that you might receive rejection even, and so on and forth. So because of all these possibilities, someone with schizoid might, avoid certain roles, avoid climbing the ladder of career, avoid certain jobs, avoid certain relationships, professional relationships, and so on and forth. So obviously, that could, to some extent, explain why many of people with schizoid will be so-called underachievers. They might be extremely intelligent. They might have, a variety of highly developed skills. But in the external life, they might not put all the skills in practice because of this defense mechanisms, these blocks or obstacles to their development and self-expression. So, in summary, we could say that what imprisons someone with schizoid is the need to cover your authentic self, the need to control your feelings, control your emotions, the need to avoid feeling vulnerable or avoid feeling like you are dependent on someone. There is also an avoidance of relationships and intimacy, because such relationships will trigger in you different feelings and emotions and make you feel like you are owning something to other people, like you need to sacrifice yourself, or that you need to please other people, and so on and forth. Now, this obviously depends on your levels of empathy and we'll know that each person is different. On a more positive note, because I don't want to make this video all completely all depressing, like there's no way out or anything like that, but on a positive note, because of all these defense mechanisms, we know that someone with schizoid has a very rich internal life because of the ability to isolate themselves from the external reality, from other people, and retreat into themselves, retreat into this shell. They are able to develop very unique perspectives on life. They might, be highly creative. They might be very perceptive to what's going on around them. And that will obviously provide them with very unique understanding and knowledge about themselves and other people. Also, there might be very high sensitivity. So sensitivity to different emotions, different dynamics of the internal life and dynamics between other people, because they are, they're more like an observer in life. And because of this, they can put people in the proper perspective, and they can see these different dynamics that occur between people. And lastly, because of this, rich connection with themselves, rich connection with the inner life, they might have a very peculiar connection with the unconscious or archetypal realm. They might be very intuitive, and perhaps maybe even they have this unique connection even with the divine. I'm not sure. It depends on how you see spirituality. So knowing all this that I've said in this video, is there a solution? That would be a very good question, because on the one hand, you might say, okay, I'm having all these positive behaviors. I'm having this very rich life. I'm very creative, and so on and forth. But many people will say that, they are tired with their condition. They might want to have these intimate relationships. They might want to, achieve more in life. They might want to feel in the first place. In very simple terms, if we just focused on disarming our defense mechanisms, so for example, if we developed a better relationship with our feelings and emotions, if we learned how to stay present so that we don't separate ourselves from our, emotional experience and physical experience, but we stay within our body and observe different reactions and so on and forth. If we also acknowledge different parts of our personality, acknowledge different states that we go to, acknowledge the fact that, we are not perfect. We have different faults within ourselves. In certain situations, we might be very, very vulnerable. We might feel like, we need help. We need to depend on someone. And perhaps if we also explore what is it that we are trying to avoid, what is it that prevents us from reaching for more in life or doing more in life, perhaps this sort of reflections could give us a clue as to, how to proceed from the current situation that we are in. On the one hand, perhaps you can't completely rewire your brain. So certain, as you might call them, schizoid behaviors might stay. For example, you might want to keep the fact that you are creative. Perhaps you might, still enjoy being on your own. And there is nothing wrong with that. But then if you look at the things that cause you distress, cause you feeling like that you are not doing enough in your life, that you can reach out for more. If you consider pros and cons between, taking steps towards the recovery and staying in the place that you are, perhaps weighting these pros and cons could give you some motivation to make certain changes in your life. And hopefully by describing these defense mechanisms in this video, I provided you with a clue as to where to seek these answers within yourself, because you are the most competent person to know what's best for you. And if you need help, don't be afraid to reach out for it, because there are many people out there who can help you out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below the video. And if you need to talk to someone, I'm available for coaching and counseling. Thank you very much for watching.